Welcome to Boomerang Diaspora.
Hello, family. My name is Calvin Mila, and I would like to welcome you to Boomerang Diaspora, a podcast sharing stories of Africans in the diaspora who are returning to Africa to either start a business or join a company to advance their careers. Today, we are joined by Fabrice Ouandji, a native of Cameroon. Fabrice is currently a partner manager for Facebook, working to increase investment into broadband enabling infrastructure in emerging markets with a focus on sub-Saharan Africa. Before joining Facebook, he was working for Google in Kenya, helping incubate, spin out, and scale a wholesale telecom infrastructure business called C Square. And before joining Google, Fabrice worked as a consultant for McKinsey. Fabrice is also a founding board member of DSA, a nonprofit organization who believes in transforming African youth through the power of sport. So, welcome, Fabrice.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Really happy to be here.
So, we're happy to have you as well. So, Fabrice, let's jump right into our discussion. And my very first question to you is actually, it's not a question, but would you be kind to share your experience working for multinational corporation in Africa and the steps that you took to get there, to be working for Google and then Facebook?
Happy to share that. I think the first thing I'd say is it's been an amazing experience being able to work in tech and being able to work in tech that impacts Africa. So when I joined Google, I was supposed to be based in Kenya, with helping scale a business in Uganda. Eventually, we launched Ghana a couple of years after I joined. Actually, about a year after I joined, we launched Ghana. And then we launched a third country in Liberia. Same business model. Google goes in, basically sets up a company that builds infrastructure for telecommunications. So build the networks, and then we find a way to commercialize them with telecom operators. My journey back to Africa started when I was leaving McKinsey after about 2.5 years of being a consultant. And at the time, I didn't know what I wanted to do, like most consultants. But what became very clear is that I really wanted to do work that was related to Africa. At the time, I thought I want to work in the health sector, education sector, because I thought I want to make that impact. So do well while doing good. And then I was thinking about multinational startup, as you talked about. I also kind of started very wide. And then eventually I ended up kind of honing the story. Like, you talk to people, you say, well, I'm really interested in electricity, but it seems like for electricity projects in Cameroon or in Africa, you need either strong banking, project finance experience, or you need to know the electricity sector quite well. And I didn't know either. So start kind of putting that off to the side. And and then eventually I kind of narrowed it down to tech. So when I started out, West Africa was key for me. It was Nigeria, Ghana, I guess Cameroon, and Central Africa. Those are the top three. Funny enough, I started my trip in East Africa with Kenya, in part because I had family there. I was actually getting a lot of interviews or informational meetings there. And third, Ebola at the time was really hot in West Africa.
Okay.
So I ended up spending 3 weeks in East Africa, going back and forth between Kenya, Tanzania, and Rwanda. And opportunities were based there, but more so I was really impressed with the dynamic that I saw.
In what ways would you say that your work is impacting Africa? And how did you adapt to local talent?
Look, so I worked in the telecom industry. That's what we're doing. We're Google, but we're looking at telecom specifically because my stakeholders, my partners were all telecom companies, right? So think about all the ones you can think of in Cameroon, MTN, Orange, yep. And that's what I still do with Facebook. I think our work is really impactful in the sense that we're basically providing the foundation for helping improve connectivity in Africa. Again, just not to get too technical, but today, if you live in Paris, if you live in DC, if you live in Chicago or wherever, or Seoul, South Korea, with the work from home issues that we have, people can transition a lot easier and homeschool their kids and work from home because you have really good connectivity coming to your home. That's not the case today in many African cities, right? And what we're doing is we actually strengthening the connectivity on the mobile device side, but the infrastructure that we're building, the fiber that we're helping create, also will support connectivity to homes because you have sufficient capacity. You build enough capacity in the network so that somebody can connect home. To me, that work was quite impactful, and we'll probably only scratch the surface. Right, the that model can be replicated in multiple cities and towns in Africa. Maybe not necessarily always with fiber because it's also expensive, but it other ways to kind of optimize technology to ensure that people have access to it to become productive. Learn a lot about mobile money. I learned tangentially, which I think is going to revolutionize uh, Africa in terms of productivity. And I can see it when I go from Kenya to Uganda to Accra, right to Ghana, where you can sit at home in Kenya, you could be at the market and buying literally produce and send somebody money through your phone. Or you can basically call somebody, send them money, and then they put whatever you want on a motorcycle or a taxi to have it delivered to your home. Tremendous, especially when you think about we're all cash economies for the most part. Informal economy is very high, and the people are very underbanked, not a lot of bank accounts. To kind of find a way to move money that's safe and secure, like mobile money, is for me it's a tremendous opportunity for unlock a lot of businesses.
What would you say to people who might be interested in moving back, but are still on the fence given the narrative coming out of Africa?
Yeah. So that's a good point. Like, I think before I start answering that, one thing that I would say is it doesn't work for everybody, right? And there's not the time might not be this. It might not be the right time for other people. And I think talked about this before. There are other ways to do that, right? Some people might stay and invest in on some of those things. It doesn't work for everybody. In my case, it made sense for a lot of reasons. I was in transition in terms of jobs. I was leaving one company and kind of was open to a lot of things. Personally, I was in a place where I was not really tied down in terms of relationships. My siblings were still in the US. That's probably the hardest part, like my siblings and parents being in the US. But otherwise, I was somewhat free. So it made a lot of sense. So kind of fast forward, what were some of the challenges? Frankly, I'm not. So I ended up spending almost 4.5 years in East Africa, living between Uganda and Kenya. Um, the things that I remember missing the most were Uber and and Google traffic. To be completely honest with you,
Okay.
that was that because productivity, right? So when I was living 2 miles from the office in Kampala in Uganda, but it could be a 15-minute ride or a 45 minutes to an hour ride.
Wow.
Guess what? I mean, a year after I got into Kenya, Uber came into Kenya, and probably 6 months later, they also came into Uganda. So solved a lot of my problems. So, frankly, to me, there's some conveniences that we all talk about that we have in the West, right? And to me, those were the major things. To your point around uh, adapting to work and potential challenges. It's interesting. When I was doing a lot of interviews, especially with the multinationals, I talked a lot about, talent level is not the same. How will you adapt to that? And I used to take offense to it because I was like, what are you guys talking about? I went to school in Cameroon. I went to a public high school. I spent a year of college in Yaoundé in Guayaquil. When I came to the US, I skipped like 3 or 4 classes of calculus, of math, right? I skipped first class of physics. So in my views, it was like, we have smart people in Africa. I wasn't very happy to hear that. And frankly, what I found on the ground is that people know their job. Some of my biggest challenges was actually uh, with some staff, right, at my job, and really around, hey guys, I have these new ideas, and I remember just pulling my hair, like, why is this not happening? That was that, and I had to find a way to make it work. In some cases, I failed, right? So I thought I had some good ideas for the business or for the teams, and those ideas were not implemented. Had some back and forth and push back, escalate to managers, and we didn't really resolve them the way I would have wanted to. Challenging. The way I thought about it was I felt like I was humble initially. I was learning the business, and quickly I wanted to say, okay, here's where we improve, especially on the process and operation side of things. And I guess the feedback I received was, well, you should have waited a bit longer, or maybe make sure you can find champions that can take these ideas and really work with the rest of the team and implement them for you. But it was a tough challenge. Was that a general experience? Not necessarily. It was that was the, I guess I always felt like, well, that's part of work, and I could experience that some other places. As a former consultant, that was kind of what you do. You're brought in from the outside, supposed to do all these things. Your management tells them, their management tell them to work with us, and you have that resistance. So I was a little bit used to that, but yet it was still a very tough challenge.
What would you say if someone was just coming back, not necessarily with those big artifacts, but they don't know anybody in East Africa? How would they how would they go by just building a network in a place where they don't know anybody?
The first thing I would say, it takes time. My first 5 months in Uganda, I was going to the office every Saturday, every Sunday for at least an hour or two, because we're running a telecom business. We're running a call center, if you will. So it was part me wanting to make sure the staff knew I was paying attention, because technically I was kind of overseeing them. It was also me wanting to learn what they were doing. So every Saturday I'll go in for probably an hour and a half, 2 hours. Sunday I'll stop in for maybe an hour. I did that for about 5 months. And that was probably because I also didn't have much of a social life. So it takes time, is what I'm saying.
Okay.
But that's where having a network helps, right? It's who do you know that passes through that town, and somehow you get connected. I truly believe that for someone who has lived in the West, I call it the US, who is considering making that move back, you're probably always 1 to 2 degrees away from knowing somebody in just about any country.
We often hear from recruiters that people in the diaspora should lower their expectation when considering moving back. And many people often complain about the salary gap. How did you manage to have that conversation, and how did that work for you?
At the time when I was making a decision, I had just kind of begun the discussion with Google for the role in Kenya. I had a different opportunity with a different company in the US that I turned down. Yes, and it was a bit of a tough decision. That was one because yes, at the time there was a huge gap. You're right, between what I was living in the US and kind of what was ahead of me with Google. Ultimately, the gap shrunk a little bit, but still, I definitely took a loss, right, when I joined. I think it really came down to it seemed as though it was really the right time for a lot of reasons, and I was willing to kind of make that sacrifice initially. I think I was also comfortable with the idea that I could have some upside salary-wise as the time went on, maybe start making up some of that gap. And I thought, okay, I could trade off. And another thing is, I looked at it as a 2-year experiment. I didn't want to think everything was going to go well, because I had heard very many stories of people moving back and just not liking it. So I really said, look, let me give it 18 months to 2 years, right? And then after that, remember what I said was, I want to move. And then after those 2 years, look for a reason to stay in Africa. That's exactly the way I put it. And so I thought, okay, if after 2 years it hasn't worked out, maybe if financially I don't think I'm in a good place, I'll come back to the US and hopefully I can go back to my pre-Google levels. But I think it started with, I was somewhat free, right? And I could take that chance and that risk. And again, I think things worked out financially because Google was good about rewarding kind of good performance, which I was able to kind of deliver. Yeah, so okay. I think it worked out. And then the other thing we should not ignore is the cost of living, as you know, right? So it's a lot lower. You still have to do the math, but it's a lot lower. And I'll posit that the cost of living in East Africa is significantly lower than Central and West Africa. So, maybe what was acceptable for me in East Africa, maybe if it was based in Ghana or Nigeria, I probably would have made a different decision.
Okay.
That's what I'll say.
Excellent. Excellent. So it's actually interesting because the decision that we make today, based sometimes on dollar or money wise, uh, they may not be like, as you go through the experience as you did, you realize that if that decision would have been made strictly on the financial side of it, you would not only have missed the experience that you had, and on top of that, you got rewarded fairly quickly.
All
Not
right.
only you also got that experience that you got, you got into, and I remember before you used to tell me that I'm not sure back in the state if I was going to be that close to decision makers as I was or I am in Africa doing work in Africa,
Completely.
which is a big deal. I think it's a big deal. A lot of us, you just want to be part of the, like, standing in line waiting for for your open for the seat to be open, or you just go where there are like open tables.
Right.
So,
It's funny. The example that a friend of mine always uses is, if you're standing in Washington D.C. or in Paris, it's like, oh man, look at that building. Look at what they're constructing now. Who's doing this? And then the answer is always, oh, it's this company, it's this fund or whatever. In Africa, it's like, oh, it's that guy. Actually, I'm gonna meet with his cousin tomorrow, and they're like, okay, let me come. Or who owns this supermarket? It's this person, and here's how you can get to them. I'm exaggerating, but the point is, for the most part, I'm not saying it as a way to boast or as a way to encourage it, but if people who are we're talking about here, people who are returning, frankly, you are part of a certain elite, be a 1 or 2 degrees of separation from some of those other people that we tend to admire in the West.
so one thing I also like want to point out, the fact that you're moving from one tech giant to another. Now you're with Facebook. Um, so like it's just about the opportunity that I see. Like, you took this opportunity and you got another one based on the one that you took,
Yeah.
and they both like center around building those infrastructure in Africa. That's pretty interesting. But how do you, like, so you start making your name out there? How did it work for you? Like,
Interesting. So with Facebook, through my work at Google, I came in contact with the people that I work with now,
okay,
and they were trying to build out their team and add to it, and they thought I'd be a good fit. So yes, we had multiple interactions. I guess during those interactions, they got a sense that I could add value, and yeah, we just started talking, and everything worked out.
good.
So but I think again, it happens. I think I think Facebook doesn't have a lot of presence in Africa on the ground. We have a lot of teams who do work in Africa, but based out of Africa, except for Johannesburg, which is the only office we have in Sub-Saharan Africa. So I think for them to find people who are doing work in Africa and can help them with what they're trying to achieve, I think they felt like I could add that value. And I think we've had a couple of people with my background that have joined Facebook after having worked at Google.
So we usually hear that like, we are one continent, but a lot of us complain that we think Cameroon is Kenya and all that. So how different are we really, if you think about it, since you've done all that professionally
Yeah.
and culturally? Are we really that different? And how do you manage to, like, just adapt everywhere you go?
Mhm. I think there's something that is, I'll start with the commonalities. There's something that is common to being African. Again, that's part of the reason why we all become Africans when we leave our countries and go to a place like the West where there are other Africans, because we all have something that we all can relate to. We're able to build relationships in a way that's just germane to our culture. There's that commonality. Um, there are definitely are differences. There's some objective measures by which we're different. The size of the economies are, for the most part, I believe, larger in East Africa. Population-wise, are also higher, right? So if I just take Kenya, Tanzania, and Uganda, right? That's at least 120 million people in just those three countries. I think Kenya is 45, Uganda is 40, and I believe Tanzania might be close to 59, if I'm not mistaken, but at least 120 million people in those three. I mean, past Nigeria and the West, if you start from western Nigeria, you start with Benin all the way to Senegal, you'd have to put all of them together, I believe. I mean, you have to put like 4 or 5 countries to get to that level, because Benin is 11, Togo is 7, Ghana is maybe 25. Right? So it's different. I believe there is also a lot more integration, both culturally, but also economically in East Africa. They have a strong East African community. I forgot what it's called again, where you have really free movement of person and goods, a lot more so than you would see like in the Central African zone. West Africa with ECOWAS, maybe there's a little more movement, but I'm not sure. So I think there's differences on the economic front. There's some objective measures like, size of the economy and things like that. Qualitatively, also you hear things like Kenyans talk about how Tanzania, I think it's a bit slower pace for doing business. And I've heard it enough times that I probably have started a bit to believe it. I think that Kenyans and Ugandans or Tanzanians are probably a bit more forthcoming with information than some countries in West Africa that I've dealt with. So there are definitely differences in different areas, but I also see opportunities, right? I think, again, somebody who's interested in tech or who's interested in kind of consumer-oriented products, I strongly recommend East Africa. Go set up in either Tanzania or Uganda or Kenya, get it to work in one of them, and you kind of have the other 2 markets available as an addressable market. I don't know if that answers your question.
No, it does. It does.
And then I'll give you one point, right? So, in Cameroon, or if you go to Cameroon or Ghana or Cote d'Ivoire, most places, if you want to rent a house, like a nice house, you have to pay 12 months in advance. No such thing in Kenya. And probably you probably get better value for your money in East Africa in general, especially Kenya. Maybe Uganda and Tanzania might be different, but very nice apartment, very nice home for probably not too much money. Quality of hotels is a lot better than what I've seen in Central and West Africa. So differences, lots of differences.
I know you're very passionate about Africa. You are a founding board member of Dream Sport of Africa. So can you tell us a little bit about that initiative?
I want to help people achieve their potential and want to focus on African youth. And the initial concept was, can we use sports as a platform to convene youth, like African youth, and then use that platform to start impart valuable skills? So in the last 5 years that we've been active, I think 2018, 2019 was kind of a coming out party. We started organizing basketball tournaments. We did a tournament with 16 schools around Nigeria. In 2019, last year, we finally hired a country manager in Nigeria full time. We incorporated in Ghana, so we want to launch some programming in Ghana as well. We also registered in Liberia. So we do a few things. So we do programming around every year. Every quarter, actually, in the US, we collect and buy sports supplies. Actually, I have 2 boxes in my house right now. Soccer cleats, jerseys, basketball, soccer balls, whatever. Put them in boxes, ship them to a country manager who goes now into different schools, like high schools mostly, and donates the supplies to encourage kids to have supplies. We used to put on training programs for coaches around the importance of, how do you teach them discipline or resilience and things like that as they go into the different classes for PE. And recently, since last year, we've now started saying, look, programming takes a lot of resources and time and money. Can we move into an online model where we can continue to push the message around, get involved in sports, stay active, and reach out more people? So we started building our online presence, and now our Facebook page has 160,000 followers. And we're about to kind of move into the next phase of what is the curriculum look like for a DSA champion, a DSA advocate, right? What are some of the skill sets that we can build to them besides just staying active and making sure that you wash your hands and all these things? We're going to start talking about, here are things that you should be mindful about is discipline. Here's how you build discipline. Here's how you build resilience. And maybe at some point start saying, hey, maybe we want to work with you on resume reviews for university kids. So we look at DSA as kind of that vehicle to help develop skills, character, and life skills and character to make African youth successful.
I like that a lot. It's a wonderful initiative. Before we close and let you go, would you please share 5 to 3 insight, or advices to people that will be interested in moving to Africa based on your experience?
Okay. Yeah, definitely. I think the first thing I would say is take a calculated risk, right? And frankly, I was going to say take a risk, but I think for entrepreneurs, they love that idea, but I'll say not everybody likes that. So I'll say take a calculated risk. And really, for me, the biggest thing is, do you have a chance to succeed? Right? If so, go for it. Bring me to the second point. Can you find a soft landing? For me, that was the case. I think I had a perfect situation where I was part of a multinational, but we're starting a business from the ground up. So it was kind of the startup feel, but with the backing of a multinational. I understand that's not always the case, but maybe soft landing means going to a country that you know already, right? Or going to a country where you have people that can help you kind of bring that up, or going after an industry that you know is kind of booming. So that's kind of second thing. The third thing I would say is nothing is finite, right? I think even in failure, there's certain learnings. It's easy for me to say, but frankly, really look at a 2-year investment as only a blip in your life, right? If you think, yes, I think I can have a soft landing here, and I think I can take this risk. There's no failure in trying. Give yourself a timeline, a year or two, and know, again, for that you need to have a backup plan. Meaning, can you go back to the US or go back to France or something like that? I mean, that's important. If you're worried about being an entrepreneur, definitely explore the MNC approach. My view has always been, I guess I'm less of an entrepreneur, so I'm more I like the things that are a bit more assured, but I don't mind starting something on the side. I mean, one of the guys that I met in Kenya in passing, I remember the first time I met him, I was with a buddy of mine, a Kenyan guy. He said, hey, let's go to this place to have a drink. The guy shows up, they're catching up. He's like, oh, last weekend I was checking on my farm and this and that. I go there twice a month, if not more. In the meantime, in the daytime, he's president or something of Coca-Cola West Africa and Central Africa, right? And probably saw him again 2 years later or something. He's like, oh, I'm still pushing that. Fast forward last year, IFC invested in the business that he started around agriculture, right? I think it's like food technology and stuff like that. IFC invested, and finally, probably 6 months ago, he left his job at Coca-Cola to be full-time running his business, because it's growth. If you're risk averse, you can kind of start something on the side. And maybe it means I'm investing while I stay in the US, invest in Africa. So I think there's no one size fits all, right. But definitely if you have the interest and the passion, find a way to get started. It could be invest and stay. It could be really give it a shot when the conditions are aligned.
All right, great, man. I thank you. We thank you for taking the time. It's always great catching up with you.
Thanks.
And
I want to commend you guys. I want to commend you guys. I think this is a tremendous idea. I think it's people don't know. People are worried, and it's good to give them the good side. It's always good to give them the not so good side.
Exactly.
So I hope you guys can kind of collate a lot of these experiences. And I love the fact that you're looking at just not entrepreneurship, but other ways to still kind of start putting something on the ground in Africa. So I wish you guys a lot of success. And
thank you, man. Thanks a lot.
Sure thing.
You take care.
All right, you too.
All right.
Talk
guys. To you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you for joining this episode of Boomerang Diaspora.